Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on this. Well, for me, it's a very foggy and frosty Friday morning. I'll go ahead and share my screen with everyone. Hopefully, you're able to see that okay. Now, to start our Friday morning off with a bang, we're going to be going through the Splunk Cloud overview today on our webinar and really give you a in-depth technical look at how it's actually brought together architecturally and why obviously it can help your business in actually using Splunk if you are already a customer and not having to deal with those kind of annoying back-end management tasks. Or you can obviously just start to use Splunk Cloud very, very quickly and easily without necessarily having the deployment overheads of potentially an on-premise implementation. So if we haven't met already, it's lovely to meet you, albeit virtually. My name is Grace Maher, and I head up our support and our pre-sales team over here at Somerford Associates. This deck was kindly created by Splunk Cloud architects themselves, so a massive thank you to them. And it just goes to show what level of in-depth knowledge we're actually going to be going through today, because it was literally written by the teams that are managing these instances. Now, just a few forward-looking statements, bit of legal stuff first. We might potentially talk about the future events or plans of the company, and essentially, we just caution everybody that those statements just reflect our current expectations based on what we know, what we hear through the grapevine, and obviously timescales or actual results may differ. So just bear that in mind. So the agenda that we're going to go through today is we're going to go through Splunk as a service, the architecture, how you can actually use it as a hybrid deployment, security and compliance on Splunk Cloud, how you can actually use different apps in the cloud monitoring console, and also how you can utilize our professional services and support with cloud deployments. And if there are any other parts that you want to go through, such as migrations or additional benefits, then please just let me know. I've got slides ready and we're more than happy to go through. Now, when we are dealing with kind of Splunk Cloud, we are really dealing with Splunk as a service, and this is quite different compared to what is normally a customer managed Splunk deployment. Now, when you're getting Splunk Cloud and Splunk as a service, you have really the fastest time to value because you don't have to worry about deploying the instance. I know that when our engineers work with Splunk Cloud deployments, they always say it's a dream because, all of that nitty-gritty stuff, setting up the clusters, getting them communicating to each other, the replication has all been done for them. And they can just focus on sending the data in and then actually getting those dashboards and reports out of the box. It eliminates your infrastructure requirements, and I know that sometimes when I do discuss deploying Splunk with some customers, the actual cost of the infrastructure that they're having to bring in, if they don't already have it there, can sometimes be quite high. So this really eliminates those costs and also the requirements of setting them up in terms of actually getting them plugged into your data center, getting them configured on the network. All of those are additional overheads that don't necessarily come involved when we're just talking about the initial Splunk deployment itself, because we almost assume that the servers are there. But obviously that is a time and a cost for you guys who are actually using Splunk. It also maximizes the value from the resources that it has. And often I always say that with the Splunk Cloud deployments, you're actually getting a instance far larger and probably superior in the actual CPU and memory and RAM that potentially you might deploy on your own server or virtual machine. So I always say it's very useful for that. Now, with Splunk Cloud as a service offering, essentially we do, or Cloud Ops do all of the initial architecture, and then you can still use your custom applications and many different ways of getting data into Splunk. You don't get limited in any way, and I'll go through how we actually secure the data sending up into your Splunk Cloud instances a little bit later on. Now, Cloud Ops manage all of the system maintenance and all of that type of patching, upgrades, anything like that. Even if it's a Splunk upgrade, you can just put in a ticket, tell them when you'd like them to do it, give them a maintenance window, and then they'll go ahead and do that for you. And of course, architecture upgrades as well as different types of instances, age out, different OSs. We obviously make sure that you're on the latest and also the most supported versions, which really, really helps as well to keep you ahead of the curve. And also, you're not having to do all of that administration to do that. We actually use Splunk ITSI to monitor all of the cloud instances. So you can make sure that all of your instances are running at 100%, there's no downtime, and it really alleviates, any issues. I always hate, that feeling. If you've ever been in that position, you come in the morning, you go to sign into something that you do every day, like Splunk, to see what's going on, and all of a sudden it's not there, it's not working. Well, that never happens with Splunk Cloud, and you're always sure that you can come in anytime, day or night, and be able to check what's going on inside of your infrastructure. And the way that the cloud ops teams manage this is by using continuous monitoring, alerting on any problems, and also having backups of your infrastructure there, of your instances, so that they can seamlessly move you across if required. They also offer all of the operational security. So if you aren't already using ITSI or ES, this is actually just monitoring your Splunk infrastructure itself. But if you do want to use ITSI or enterprise security as a customer, you can do that with Splunk Cloud. And again, we will go through the architecture of how you can do that as well and how it's actually set up. Now, with Splunk Cloud, I'll go through the security accreditations later, but we've got SOC 2 Type 2 and ISO 27001, and we audit all of the way that we're storing the data. We adhere to those compliance regulations very, very strictly. And so it's also the extra layer of security that, your data is being cared for in the way it really should be. Then we have CMDB that's running on the back end to make sure that everybody knows who everybody is. If you're raising a ticket, they know what instance it's for, and they can go ahead and obviously help you much quicker as well because they can go on and actually, see what's going on for themselves in the Splunk Cloud instance. Also, they can do config management, and if you do need any changes to the backend configurations, such as indexes.conf or props.conf, etc., you can basically provide them the file and they'll go ahead and put it in for you, make sure that it's working correctly, and then just send you a little email back saying, can you go on and check that everything is as it should now? Now, Splunk Cloud actually uses a Git repo to go ahead and store all of the configurations. So there's really strict configuration management as well and version control to make sure that if there is ever a problem, we can just roll you back to a previous one. And we automate all of this by using Puppet. And obviously, if you internally are using Puppet, Ansible, Chef, whatever you may like, then you're able to use that with Splunk as well and with Splunk Cloud. There's no limits to that. We also have specific administrators that you can use on call, and using those with Splunk Cloud is a really, really great way of being able to get set up very, very quickly with Splunk Cloud, not necessarily having to use days and days of professional services, and just kind of doing most of the work yourself, but getting that help when and as and when you really need it. Whenever you do want to make a change, we actually coordinate when we're going to make those changes and try to do them in like one big sweep to make sure that everything is working as it should. And then we'll also go ahead and make sure that we leave a case open until you confirm that you're happy with the configuration change that has been changed. We also have completely dynamic architecture, and I mentioned about this previously with the kind of always on approach, but we replicate the instances many times so that if there is ever a problem, or even if, for example, AWS gets wiped out by a natural disaster in a certain area, that we can move you over to a different availability zone and have everything still replicated there. Now, what does this mean as a customer? Well, realistically, you only have three steps. First of all, to onboard your data. Second, to get your users and actually onboard them, get them signed in, whether that's hooking it up with LDAP or AD, or potentially using another SSO product, or whether it's just, making local users themselves. And then it's just getting those users to search that data, start reporting, alerting, and getting value from it very quickly. So the Splunk Cloud architecture is really interesting and really, really robust, and that's why I love it. I often tell customers when we are looking at kind of an initial implementation, if they're thinking about, oh, should we do this ourselves or should we use Splunk Cloud? I always suggest using Splunk Cloud just because the architecture is really, really robust and also very, very secure, and you can really make sure that you're never going to have that downtime. And because you're obviously not also having to deal with all of the management and the back end stuff, it reduces a lot of the load on the individual users as well. Now, if we imagine everything on the left here is inside of your organization, and everything on the right is in AWS, which is where we run our Splunk Cloud instances. Essentially, what happens is you obviously may have several different data types, and don't be scared by this. When I put it up, sometimes people go, "Oh, I don't want to look at this." But we'll break it down, and it's a lot simpler than maybe it looks on the surface. So what happens is you'll have all of your different data inputs, whether that's using heavy forwarders, universal forwarders, using HTTP event collectors, REST APIs, you name it, Splunk and Splunk Cloud. The data inputs are exactly the same. You still have access to all of those different methods. There's no limitations or anything like that. So, don't worry that, oh, I have databases I want to get data from and they're on premise, so I can't use Splunk Cloud. That's never a problem. We send the data through a secured way using a SSL certificate, essentially. And that way we can make sure that the data is encrypted when it's being sent, which obviously is really, really important when the data is coming outside of your network. Now, what we do is then send the data straight into our cluster of indexes. And with Splunk Cloud, always the indexes are clustered there. We actually use a elastic load balancer to help any of the data that's coming from the other cloud services and the VPC itself to come in, which means that obviously if there's anything going wrong with the indexes themselves, everything like that is logged, and everything is obviously then alerted on if there is a problem to the cloud ops team to go ahead and then have a look at what's going on there. Now, if you do have an on-premise deployment currently, you can also use a on-premise search head with Splunk Cloud, and later on we'll go through how we can actually do that. Then what you'll have inside of Splunk Cloud, of course, on top of your cluster of indexes will be your search heads. Now, you may have a core search head, as in for Splunk normally, your normal Splunk searching, your apps, etc. And then you may have another one for your premium apps, such as ITSI, Enterprise Security, or maybe if you want to run something like some of the newer apps that are coming out now as well. Now, with Splunk Cloud, you can make great use of the dynamic data storage, and essentially it allows you a way if you do want to store your data for a longer period of time without necessarily paying for the retention costs to keep it within Splunk Cloud itself. Now, what this does is if you do want to have data that is managed by Splunk itself, you can use obviously the regular storage increments that you can purchase, and we can go through that later on if any of you do have any requirements for that. Now, with your license, you'll normally get given about 90 times your license size in terms of storage straight away. And that enables you, in theory, to store obviously all of your data for 90 days. But if there's certain indexes that you're less concerned about, you want to keep them for a shorter time, maybe a week, a month, something like that, then obviously you can utilize the extra storage that's been freed up for other indexes. If you want to store it for longer than that, though, across the board, you have many different methods. So obviously the first is to use the actual data storage blocks, which we can always go through later on. The second is to still keep the data Splunk managed and use the active archive, and that we call dynamic data active archive, which is why it says DDAA. And this is really great for any data that needs to be searched for maybe compliance or investigation. You're not so concerned about having it always actively searched. You might not be always doing say searches for over 6 months or a year ago, but maybe you want to just access it in the event that you need to do an investigation. Active Archive is a really, really great way of being able to do that. Now, if you are looking at storing it for a very, very long time, and maybe you don't actually need to search it very often at all, and you just want to move the data out of the Splunk managed instance into your own S3 or own AWS, you can go ahead and use the dynamic data self-storage for that. And that's a great way if you do have compliance requirements where you have to keep the data, but you know that you won't ever have to search it or necessarily report on it, or if that's very, very rarely. Now, the data will reside within your AWS S3 account, and essentially that's included in your licensing. Obviously, you just have to pay for the AWS S3 storage for whatever size that you may use. So, just to give you a bit of a recap of what we discussed in terms of the architecture and really why the Splunk Cloud architecture is so robust and so, a lot of the time, so much better than what a customer might want to deploy in their own on premises because of, cost or actual deployment time. Now, first of all, we have data replication. Because we have those clustered indexes, we copy the data 3 times across all of those indexes. And we also then have different instances of these indexes, which is a bit of a mouthful, across different availability zones, which is what I was discussing earlier. If AWS ever had a outage or natural disaster in a certain area and the data center was taken out, then you would be moved over to a different availability zone. And that really makes it very fault tolerant and again is maintaining that always on architecture. We take backups so that we can make sure that your configurations are backed up, and we do that every hour. And then we also go ahead and take a backup of about 7 days worth of data when they roll from hot to warm. So essentially, that is often happening whenever data is just kind of aging, depending on the age of the bucket. But also, if you're ever running Splunk on-prem, then they always, advise that when you restart Splunk, all of the buckets roll from hot to warm. Now, within Splunk Cloud, we actually don't let the hot buckets get bigger than 24 hours, which is really best practice, and it also makes it quicker for you to search as well, because hot buckets are a little bit slower to search because essentially they're being written to and read from at the same time. We have a self-healing architecture which uses AWS's auto-scaling functions so that failed instances are replaced in real time and then added back into the cluster automatically without needing any human intervention. So the idea is again that we're really preventing any faults, preventing any downtime. And of course, we use load balancing for both your search head clusters and the indexing data and the index clusters there. We use a heck load balancer for that, and then we just use search head load balancing within the search head cluster architecture. So earlier we discussed, I kind of alluded to the fact that you can use a on-premise search head with Splunk Cloud. And it always kind of piques a lot of people's interest if they are a current Splunk customer. And this is because if you already have a deployment, you may have a requirement where you want to go ahead and search different data, which may now be sent to Splunk Cloud, but you might not want to have all of your dashboards and configurations that you spent a long time developing in on-prem just go ahead and either kind of be defunct or you have to go and migrate them. Again, it can alleviate that extra work that you would have to do if you have already, spent some time and effort getting the dashboards just how you like. Now, again, you have all of your different deployments, whether it's in US, EMEA, or APAC. And then essentially what you'll have is your on-premise search head. Now, you can have all of the data sent into your Splunk Cloud forwarders. And essentially, what we see by the Splunk Cloud Forwarder app, it's this little app that you can download from the Splunk Cloud instance. And what it has in it is a pre-configured outputs file and also an SSL cert to make sure that the data is being encrypted in transit. And it also prevents any rogue forwarders from being able to contact your instance or any rogue data getting in. Now, once your data is obviously within your indexes in Splunk Cloud, you can use your on-premise search head to search these indexes. And then obviously you can have those dashboards, reports, different analytics that you've already set up, or even if maybe you have third-party tools that feed off of those kind of data inputs, you can then connect those through your on-premise search head to prevent those having to either contact the cloud or potentially, not being able to use those with the Splunk Cloud infrastructure. So it really allows you to expand your current Splunk Enterprise deployment with having all of the robust data architecture features of Splunk Cloud, but still giving you that single pane of glass visibility if you prefer to keep your dashboards and your views on-prem. Now, just because you're using an on-prem search head doesn't mean you can't use the cloud one. So obviously you could even have different groups of users having access to either the on-prem one or the cloud one. It's completely up to you. Now, when we're talking about security and compliance on Splunk Cloud, it gets very, very a long list of certifications very, very quickly, shall I say. Now, with Splunk Cloud, we're SOC 2 Type 2, ISO 27001, which I discussed earlier, which really maintains that we are keeping your data stored in the securest way possible and also preventing any problems with the replication of that data, the deployment, and things like that. Now, we encrypt the data in transit, as I said, by using that certificate file on the forwarder. And we can also encrypt the data at rest if we need to as well. Now, each customer has a dedicated cloud environment, and Splunk Cloud runs within its own Amazon VPC, so you don't get any problems with, that noisy neighbor type of scenario or anything like that. Now, the SOC 2 compliance requires that only command line access can be done by the Splunk Cloud Ops. So those guys are the ones, like I said, that will go ahead and make those changes to any config files that you need to, and anything like that. Now, there is still a whole host of apps which are available for Splunk Cloud, and again, I'll go through that a little bit later on. And if you are worried about your on-prem or pre-built apps that maybe you've already built within your on-prem Splunk instance, we can actually use a app inspect for any private apps that you guys have made, which basically just goes ahead and checks that there's no bad config, no problems, nothing that's going to affect the Splunk Cloud instance itself. And providing it passes all those checks with flying colors, which I'm sure it would, then you can go ahead and have that uploaded to your Splunk Cloud search head as well. So it definitely doesn't prevent you from from being able to use any of your apps that you've already developed, or potentially apps that you're in the middle of developing or thinking of, or even if you have some really gifted HTML, CSS, or JavaScript devs and you want to use those guys to have some great dashboard views and things like that, and you want to make those into custom apps for yourself. Now, for regulatory compliance, if you're dealing with sensitive data, and this is mainly for, our American customers with the HIPAA Act, but for any PCI or DSS compliant data, anything that has customer information, payment card industry data, anything that contains, if you're an e-commerce business, any types of data where it's going to have either people's names, order information, credit card numbers, you name it. We have specific standards to make sure that the Splunk Cloud and the Splunk Cloud Ops guys will manage the customer data in accordance with these regulations, and also that we have a new specific SKU for making sure that the teams are aware that the Splunk Cloud deployment is actually, utilizing PCI data, so they can make sure that everything is kind of all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted, so to speak. Now, again, this is more for the US federal government here, but I felt like it was useful to just kind of mention it, just to give you this kind of extra level of security in the fact that that Splunk Cloud is able to do these types of things. So essentially, FedRAMP is a cybersecurity program if anybody needs to utilize any type of software or application within the US federal government. And essentially, what we do is we go ahead and we've gone through this process many times, and now we can pretty much know that we're going to get through it very easily, where we can make sure that we adhere against the framework. We can go ahead and go through the authorization via the sponsoring agency or the customer that obviously the government wants to utilize Splunk Cloud, and also make sure that we continue to do continuous monitoring to feed back into that FedRAMP security program by monitoring those deliverable values that we decide there. So it's a really great way of being able to implement Splunk Cloud into those government organizations, specifically for the stateside customers there. So applications on Splunk Cloud, a few slides ago we discussed how to get your custom apps, those private apps, onto Splunk Cloud using the App Inspect. Now with the Splunk-based apps, not all of them are necessarily vetted yet, but I say yet because they are going through it. It's really up to private developers if they're built by them, or if they are vendor built, for them to go through and get those certified. It's quite a simple process, and most of them are certified now. And as you can see, we've got over 850. I believe that number is closer to 1,000 now as well. Now, most of our common customer use cases, all of those common apps are pretty much all vetted. Things like obviously the ES and the ITSI premium solutions, but things like the Splunk app for Cisco security, the Splunk app for Windows infrastructure, the Splunk app for infrastructure, the Splunk app for AWS, the Splunk app for ServiceNow, things like that. All of those are pre-vetted, so you can literally just go ahead and install them at the click of a button. Now, you might be thinking why we're taking this extra layer of kind of caution with apps and making developers and vendors recertify. And this is essentially so that we can prevent any scripts or any configuration that might potentially alter the way that the Splunk Cloud instance works or may prevent it from communicating in the correct way, just to obviously, again, maintain the uptime and make sure that there's no problems with that. Again, if you have any private apps that you're looking to migrate or that you want to migrate in the future, you can use the App Inspect. It's a free tool to download and use, and it will also give you pointers. If you don't pass it, you can go ahead and have a kind of printout of what you need to change. So if there's any specific files that need changing permissions, or if there's any files that need removing, it will go ahead and give you that level of information as well. Now, with actually deploying apps that are pre-vetted, it's one that I mentioned earlier, like True Blue Peter style, the Splunk app for Windows infrastructure. If these are certified, they can be automatically installed through the UI. You literally just go into your apps page, and then you can go ahead and look on the install a new app file. You can search for the name, and then it will go ahead and download it for you. What's great about this as well is it will also download any dependencies. So the Splunk app for Windows infrastructure is a great one because it needs the TA of the Windows TA. Now, both of those things need to get deployed on different levels. So you would have the app on the search head, and then obviously the TA on the indexes and also on your forwarders. Now, if you were doing that manually, you'd obviously have to go through, download the files, and deploy them yourselves. But with Splunk Cloud, what it does is it actually goes ahead and deploys those dependencies and the app for you in the right places. So that way you can just go ahead and configure them. And obviously, then if you do need to deploy it on your universal forwarders, which are inside your own environment, then it's a pretty simple setup for those as well. Now, something that is, I say new, it's been around for about 6 to 8 months now, is the Cloud Monitoring Console. Now, if you're used to using the monitoring console within Splunk on-premise and Splunk Enterprise, then it's a very similar style of view, except rather than coming up in the settings page and then going into that way, it comes up as a separate app. This gives you still an overview page. You can see your indexing performance. You can see any index detail, data quality issues, parsing issues. You can see usage activity by detail or just by what searches they've run today. You can also then see your license utilization, whether that's volume or infrastructure based. And you can also still do all of your forwarder management within that as well. Within your searching monitoring, we can see if there's any skipped searches, which is very, very important to see, because obviously those might be due to too many searches being run at one time, or if they are a scheduled search, if you've got 50 say to run at the same minute every day, then it will just highlight that and allow you to go ahead and space those out to just make better use of the resources there. Now, I'll go ahead and pop these links in the chat as well, because it's really useful to have the definition, just some FAQs on how to use Splunk Cloud, and also the terms of service, as well as the links for any dev apps that you might want to use with Splunk Cloud. I know that's probably a bit of a baptism of fire into Splunk Cloud on your Friday morning, but I just wanted to give a good amount of time if anybody had any questions on Splunk Cloud specifically, or obviously on Splunk in general. That's not a problem at all. So we've got a question already. Is there a way to extend retention in Splunk Cloud? So there definitely is. Earlier we went through the different ways of being able to extend that retention. I assume what you probably mean is within the actual index storage that you have currently, as in searchable, actively searchable storage. So at the moment that's sold in 500 gigabyte chunks. So you can just buy as you need, and that's on an annual basis. So it's completely up to you, how you want to have that. You could either buy it throughout the year, or you could buy, say 5 chunks at the start of the year and then use those for the rest of the time. So you can really buy it kind of as and when you need it. So we had another one, which is the benefits versus hosting ourselves. So hopefully I would have kind of covered this earlier, but realistically, it's obviously the type of deployment that you get and the scale of that. The replication of the data, often you may run a cluster, but obviously you're not going to run that 3 times in different availability zones. That would be extremely costly, but because you're utilizing Splunk Cloud, we're able to use that always on architecture to really kind of replicate that for you and obviously prevent any downtime. Second of all is the administration and configuration management. So you don't need to deal with any changing of the configuration files. You don't need to worry about any of the backend management or any of the actual infrastructure, patching, upgrades, things like that. And then, of course, thirdly, there is the kind of entire just management of the service for you. So if you want to have an upgrade done of Splunk, they'll do it for you. If you want to have an upgrade of an app, they'll do that for you too. If you want to change a particular config file, you can just ask for the change that you want done, and they'll go ahead and help you with that as well. So it's a really nice way of getting set up with Splunk very, very quickly and easily, but also without having to necessarily obviously spend a lot of time, and whether that's time yourself or time within the team, or even money to get consultants in for longer amounts of time to actually deploy the kind of underlying Splunk infrastructure. Then obviously you've got deploying Splunk and then getting all of the data in as well. So it's much faster time to value. You don't have to deal with say a week-long deployment. It might just be a couple of days. So it's a really nice, easy way of getting set up with Splunk quickly, easily, and also preventing the administration from your side as well. But again, if you do have any questions or you'd like to follow up, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Or if you would like a one-on-one demo of Splunk, then please just contact either info@somerfordassociates.com, or if you're already working with us, just reach out to your account manager and we'll be able to get that organized for you. Again, I hope you have a wonderful day and a great weekend, and stay safe and take care, everyone. Thank you.